AWARD is an acronym. It stands for the Association for Water and Rural Development. We've been around for about 20 years. We're a non-profit and we work at a whole range of scales, right from community level right up to policy imperatives between different countries, mainly Mozambique and South Africa, and for example water sharing agreements between those neighbouring countries. We've worked largely on water until the last 3 years, and now we've been working more closely on issues of climate change and on the association between natural resources degradation and people's livelihoods, and what the impacts might be of climate change on that particular complicated story. You know, when it comes to climate change, the future is not a particularly pretty one. We're working through at the moment trying to get some reasonable data for particular areas, because what we think is going to happen in the lower Olifant might differ from, for example, the middle Olifants to the upper Olifants. But what we do know at the moment, for example, in the lower Olifants, is that there definitely will be an increase in temperature. And some of those projections are quite frightening. We're talking about 4 days, 5 days a month with temperatures that are above the current averages by about 4 to 5 degrees. So immediately, you know, it doesn't take an enormous amount to think about what that means for water security. You're going to have very high evaporation rates, very high evapotranspiration rates. It's going to impact on the capacity of dams. It's going to impact on flow rates of rivers, which in turn then impact on water quality issues and the dilution capacity of rivers. And we have major water quality issues in the Olifants River. In terms of rainfall, the data and the models are less certain at the moment. You know, they vary anything between slightly less rainfall, above average rainfall. What we do know, however, is that we're probably going to have more extreme events. So we're talking about increased flooding risks, and we're talking about you know, much deeper, prolonged, heightened droughts. So part of what RESLMO and USAID are particularly interested in doing is trying to build our capacity to adapt to these very uncertain futures, but quite extreme futures. You know, certainly in this eastern border of southern Africa. And so part of what RESLMO has been trying to look at is how do people even know about climate change? Okay, which is surprisingly few people actually really understand climate change. Generally, when we speak to people there, rural communities, they have heard of climate change. Often in South Africa, there's not much understanding around climate change, or people haven't heard about it. You're just starting with people not even knowing very much about climate change. And then you're starting to think into different ways that you can support building people's adaptive capacity around climate change.
I'm Taryn Kong, and I'm the Systems and Climate Change Researcher at AWARD. In order for the catchment to build resilience to climate change, there must be a common understanding that they cannot do business as usual. They must need to do adaptation to climate change. At the moment, we're engaging with governments at multiple levels. In my case, I've been working mostly with the local governments, but there are other AWARD projects that are also engaging with the provincial and the national level and across different departments, because climate change impacts on basically every sector. And also, climate change can impact different sectors, not necessarily always directly. There's so many interlinkages. So climate change adaptation requires a holistic approach as opposed to just sector by sector. To do climate change adaptation at local government level is not just an issue of capacity. It is also an issue of political will. I can give them all the information they need and walk them through and build the capacity to understand what climate change is and what it means for them and what are some of the adaptations. However, if decision makers themselves don't buy into it, at the end of the day, that just remains a piece of knowledge. It won't get translated into action. Too oftentimes, people look at climate change adaptation sector by sector or within each different sphere in the government, and not enough integration is being done. In order for climate change adaptation to be effective, one needs to also pay attention to the integrations of these adaptations at different levels.